its work combating corruption, strengthening good government, and upholding the rule of law. BOPAC has 62 national chapters and is present in every region of the world. In addition to his overall responsibilities, Akash leads BOPAC's project on international prosecution of crimes against humanity. Its work in reconciliation in post-conflict states, and its efforts to strengthen integrity in the global sports system. It continues. The United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration selected him to speak for the world legislators in the General Assembly chamber on bringing kleptocrats to justice. A frequent contributor to international debate, his articles have been published by newspapers in every populated continent. He appeared as a broadcast essayist with TV Ontario's The Agenda, and Maclean's newspaper named him as one of Canada's 50 most well-respected personalities. Earlier in his career, he was a triple gold medalist at the International Championships of Equestrian Skills at Arms. He subsequently led the overall Canadian equestrian team and federation as CEO to the team's most successful Olympics and Paralympics of all time. He remains a director of the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports. Akash earned his master's from Oxford University in philosophy, politics, economics, and was the first overseas student elected president of the student government in the university's history. He completed further studies at the Sorbonne Université and the United Nations University. He is a governor and fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. He has been decorated twice in Canada's national honors for his work in peace in the Middle East and for his services to integrity in international sport. He was also commissioned by Kentucky Colonel, the state's highest honor for his contribution in global affairs, or to global affairs. An active volunteer, Akash has taught adult literacy, has served as a director on a range of international development and local community boards, and has been particularly involved in UNICEF's efforts on childhood and maternal welfare. It ends by saying he is fluent in English and French. Akash's website, that is his personal website, can be found at www.maharaj, and that Maharaj is spelled MAHARAJ.org. So ladies and gentlemen, let me now welcome Mr. Maharaj to the platform of Civic Vibes. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Doctors. It's lovely to be here with you.
Yes, and again, it's a pleasure having you on board. Let me, on behalf of all the folks that are glued onto the live this afternoon, thank you very much for taking time of your Sunday afternoon and coming to discuss with us, as it were, on a very important topic that is not just plaguing Dominica, as it were, not just the region, but the world at large. And you are one of the esteemed men out there trying to counteract or bring a balance where corruption or corrupt activities is concerned. Mr. Maharaj, without further ado, I know I read a bio of you, which is very extensive, but can you just give the people out there a better appreciation, just who Mr. Maharaj is and the type of work that you do out there in terms of the topic for discussion this afternoon?
Certainly. Well, I don't think anyone finds himself or his work very interesting, but I'm very passionate about it. Yeah. The organization I work with is called the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, as you mentioned. And as you said, it tries to combat corruption by working with legislators to pass laws and to provide oversight over government's use of public power and public resources to reduce the chances that they are abusing that power and those resources for private gain. In the fight against corruption around the world, the fight against corruption around the world is everyone's fight, and there's a role for people from all walks of life. I would say that the people who are most effective in fighting corruption are ordinary citizens who decide that they are not going to tolerate corruption in their country and create the political momentum necessary to curb corruption. My work with legislators is part of that effort. That is to say, in theory at least, although not always in practice, the fundamental role of the legislator is to represent his or her constituents, to oversee the executive branch of government's use of public resources, and to ensure that the government is acting in the public interest. Now, legislators are no less and no more human than anyone else. And so members of parliament are just as susceptible to corruption as anyone else. They're perhaps more tempted to corruption than most people because they have the opportunity to wield power and they are in the way of corruption. They can often be recruited or co-opted to be used as agents of corruption. So I would emphasize that my work with legislators does not assume that legislators are angels. They're not. It instead it's based on the idea that there are mechanisms for public accountability between legislators and the population. And at least in democracies, there are mechanisms for the people to put pressure on their legislators to do the right thing. In other words, fight corruption or I won't vote for you, fight corruption or you're out of a job. And from a very venal perspective, if you can be seen as a legislator to be fighting corruption, then you are more likely to be re-elected, more likely to prosper in your political career, more likely to become a minister, prime minister, or president. That's the work I've been working on. It's had its ups and downs. Democracies around the world, it's never a smooth ride. We often think to ourselves that history is the history of progress, of more freedom, of more integrity, of more prosperity. But that's not true. Countries move back and forward. They progress and they regress. They fight corruption and sometimes they succumb to corruption. The fight for corruption is an ongoing battle. It's always been part of the political process. It always will be. And for those of us who believe in good government, we have to keep fighting because the other side isn't going to stop fighting.
Yeah, and I appreciate that very much in terms of your opening statement here, just giving us an idea of the type of work that you do out there and how important it is in terms of our livelihood as ordinary persons living. Well, I'm living in Dominica and also this region and by extension the world. Let me ask you straight off the bat, Mr. Can I just say Akash for the
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, Akash, yes. That's easier to pronounce. Mr. Akash, let me ask you straight off the bat, how difficult it is for states like ours, small island states, to sort of have corruption or corrupt activities under control?
I would say that, Dominica is a country of relatively modest size, about 72,000 people, I believe, in the last census. And that is quite modest in scale. As a result, countries like Dominica, especially islands in the Caribbean and in the South Pacific, they face special challenges in fighting corruption. Part of it is that the basic institution of parliamentary democracy often doesn't work well in small states. So Dominica only has 32 members of parliament. In a large parliament, in a larger country that has tens of millions of people, the government, the prime minister and the ministers make up a small part of the parliament, perhaps a dozen people or so. The vast majority of other legislators are backbench MPs, either on the government side or on the opposition benches. As a result, parliament can play a very robust role in overseeing the government because most MPs are not part of the government. In countries with small legislatures, though, most MPs, or at least most government MPs, tend to be ministers. And the parliamentary system can break down because what that basically means is that the ministers who dominate parliament are overseeing themselves. The people who are responsible for ensuring that no one is stealing are the people who are stealing. And that is perhaps the single greatest challenge for smaller countries and smaller parliaments. In addition to that, countries more in the West Indies than in the South Pacific, but just sitting next to the South Pacific, undoubtedly labor under the legacy of post-colonialism. I mean, for the vast majority of Caribbean, West Indian states, their history is defined by the history of British or French or Spanish occupation. And the way in which most of those colonizers operated, especially in the islands where the colonizers represented a small percentage of the population, was to control the population through corruption, by turning people against one another, by using money and inducement to persuade members of the community who had power over others to use those powers for personal benefit and the benefit of the colonizers rather than for the benefit of the people. Obviously, decolonization has happened in most of these countries, at least a generation, sometimes more than a generation ago. But that legacy, the basic colonial legacy of divide and conquer, divide and rule, that remains a characteristic, I would say, of the political processes of many countries. I won't say that that's the case in Dominica. I will simply say that it is the case in many countries I have observed, where the colonizers left, but the mentality of colonialism has remained. Mm-hmm. The last aspect is, I would say that many smaller countries tend to be vulnerable to corruption that comes from outside. That is to say, the budgets are relatively modest. The national budgets are relatively modest. And that means that there is an increased capacity for corrupt states or corrupt individuals, wealthy individuals from outside the country, to exercise disproportionate influence over local politics by offering what they would call investment, what I would call bribes, by purchasing citizenship or passports or even diplomatic postings, and using that money to infiltrate the political process. None of these things are insurmountable. They can be overcome because there are also advantages to being to smaller societies. One is that people generally know one another or are connected to one another. It's difficult to have secrets in a smaller society. It's difficult to cover up theft on a large scale. And that, I think, leads in to the critical question that faces smaller countries with smaller populations. And that is the population going to stand up to corruption, or is it going to become complicit in corruption? I've seen many smaller countries where the population's attitude has been, I don't mind the thief being in office as long as it's my thief, as long as it's a thief who puts something in my pocket. Mm-hmm. And needless to say, if the political culture is one of dueling corruption, of dueling thieves, then everyone is hurt. Countries that have managed to break the cycle of corruption are countries where there's been a cultural decision, an act of national will, where people have decided we are all better off if there are no thieves in office. Not my thief, not you, your thief, but no thieves. That is it is the most important aspect of fighting corruption. It's also the most difficult.
Yeah. Thank you for that response indeed. When I went through the bio, it says here that you are part and parcel of GOPAC, and that is the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption. I must be very true to you and true with you. It's the very first time I've even heard about that organization. And so my question to you is, how is that organization doing it? So can you give us a more breakdown or detail, aspect as to how you guys go about doing your work as it relates to corruption in different countries?
Of course. The basic idea behind GOPAC is, as I mentioned earlier, that legislators have a calling to fight corruption. And we operate through a system of national chapters. Although it's an international organization, a global organization, we recognize that fighting corruption is always a national campaign. It's a national crusade.
Yeah.
Legislators have to work in their own country before they can even think about working across borders. So we start off by trying to identify groups of legislators in individual countries who step forward and say that they have a genuine commitment to fighting corruption. The second aspect is that we always insist that those legislators must work together across party lines. If if all the legislators in a certain country who want to be part of GOPAC say all come from a single party, we encourage them in their work to fight corruption, but they can't do so as a GOPAC national chapter. And the reason for that is, if you really believe in corruption and fighting corruption, you have to believe that it is more important than political and partisan divisions. As well, if you have a chapter that's made up only of people from one party, they will inevitably find fault with the other parties. They will accuse others of being corrupt, but never look at corruption within themselves. But if we can find a group of legislators from both sides of Parliament, that is from both the government and opposition parties, we bring them together, we encourage them to develop an anti-corruption agenda, and we encourage the development of that agenda partly by giving them access to our resources, that is our experience of what has worked in some countries like theirs and what has failed. But probably the most important thing is that we connect them to legislators in other countries who have been successful in fighting corruption. Being a legislator is a trade, like any other trade, like being a plumber or a farmer or a dentist or anything else that requires specific skills. But for some reason, in most democracies, we don't think of politics as being a trade. We think of it as, anyone can be a politician because anyone has an opinion. There's a large distance between having an opinion and having beliefs, and being able to pass laws and regulations that press those ideas and beliefs into your society.
Yes.
So connecting legislators with other legislators who have been part of that profession, especially legislators in countries that may have been at a similar level of political progress and faced similar issues, that's always very helpful. And the last element is that we do connect them, the legislators, to international institutions, and that tends to be most helpful in the developing world. Most countries in the developing world receive some sort of investment or assistance from international institutions or from outside bodies. Often that money is stolen. And so we connect legislators to those institutions to help them develop systems of oversight, so that if money is coming into the country, there is some kind of public scrutiny to make sure that the money is reaching the people. And if there are resources going out of the country, there's some kind of international scrutiny to ensure that that money has been used again for the public benefit. Right now, we have about 64 chapters across the world. So we have GOPAC chapters in about a third of the countries of the world. Some of them are highly active, especially in Eastern Europe and in Latin America. Some of them are less active, as in Central Asia, but we do our best.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so that call, for example, from a country standpoint, and let me just tell our viewers there, the number of folks that are there already. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for listening. Please plug in your question or comments or whatever you want to know from Mr. Akash this afternoon in terms of the topic we're discussing there. I'll try my very best to ask him those questions on your behalf. But Mr. Akash, as we continue here, in terms of, from a country standpoint rather, who would you guys at GOPAC respond to in terms of the country, aligning itself with GOPAC? From the government, from opposition, from the ordinary man on the ground, who can make that request?
It always comes from the legislators, because GOPAC is an organization of legislators. Our first point of contact is always members of parliament. And the good news in that respect is that there are always members of parliament who want at least to be seen to be fighting corruption. The question for us is, how sincere are they? But I'm a great believer in the idea that we shouldn't, at least I cannot bother too much about what people's motives are. I have to be focused on what their actions are. So there are people who fight corruption because they are genuinely people of integrity and want to see the right thing done for their country. That's wonderful. There are also people who fight corruption because they want to be seen to be champions, and so the voters will reward them, and they're more likely to be re-elected. That to me is fine. There's some people who fight corruption because they want vengeance on a prime minister or a president who has offended them. All those things are different kinds of motives, but the important thing from our perspective, is that they do the right thing. Even sometimes they do the right thing for the wrong reason. Having said all this, the really effective GOPAC national chapters, the ones that make a real difference in their societies, have been GOPAC chapters who have worked closely with citizens and citizen organizations. I would choose as an example, Gopak's chapter in the United Kingdom, in Britain. They, a few years ago, brought in a beneficial ownership registry in concert with the Prime Minister. And basically what that means is they brought in laws to abolish the possibility of anonymous corporations. If you can register a company anonymously and allow it to operate anonymously, that is to say, you don't know who the human beings are who own and control and benefit from the company, well, then that company can be used for all sorts of corrupt purposes, for money laundering, for influence peddling. The moment you attach people's names to it, so you know this company is owned by a certain group of individuals, it's controlled by a certain group of individuals, it benefits a certain group of individuals, you can track the money and you can track the influence, and that cuts down on the capacity for that institution to be used for corrupt purposes. Our chapter brought in those laws by really pressing the then Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, and eventually convincing him that it would be part of his legacy as Prime Minister if he could change these laws. But the reason our chapter was able to achieve that was because there was an entire community of citizen organizations in Britain with whom they were working to help develop that legislation, to write it, to consider what kinds of technical aspects would be necessary to make the legislation work. And critically, people who were making noise in society, so citizen groups and individual citizens who were writing letters to the members of parliament, to the Prime Minister, who were standing up in meetings saying, the status quo is unacceptable, we have to pass these laws, making enough noise and creating enough pressure that David Cameron's government realized they had to act, otherwise they would be punished by their voters, and B, there was some political benefit to them to be seen to be acting. That kind of partnership where legislators use their influence to shape government policy and are able to draw on the power of the people is the ideal situation.
Yeah, indeed. And I want to kind of zero in on now on sort of a local context, because a lot of the persons that are on the live, I am kind of hearing them. They are itching to want me to ask you certain questions where our local politics or local happenings is concerned. And so just bear with me just a little bit. What would you, okay, before I go there, Akash, before I go there, the word corruption in Dominica, it has been around for some time. Some persons have basically gotten immune to it. Some persons are working along with it, because we in Dominica, we have been witnessing, and I say that with a level of certainty, we have been witnessing a lot of activities that can boil down to corrupt activities. Obviously, the perpetrators of these activities will say otherwise. The persons who are looking on, like myself, the persons who are anti-corrupt activities, we know otherwise, so we have to say otherwise. Let me just break down the Dominican context for you so that you can get a better idea of where we are at in Dominica as it pertains to corruption and corrupt activities, and even the word corruption. We in 2022, the word corruption surfaced in Dominica about the year 2000. Persons in Dominica, I can comfortably say, in terms of our electoral politics, we did not know the word corruption before 2000. In the year 2000, there was this general election, and this Prime Minister, he died now, Honorable Rosie Douglas. He basically contested the seat as the leader of the Dominican Labour Party. The Dominican Labour Party is in office today still after 22 years. But in the year 2000, that was the big buzzword on the ground. Corruption, corruption, corruption. And so the Dominican population, by and large, they did not come to grips with that term or that word corruption or corrupt activities. And so it really took the population by storm, in that here it is, this leader from this party came and accused the government of the day, which was the United Workers' Party government, of being corrupt, they doing corrupt activities. And so there was this thrust at the time to say, okay, let us get rid of these guys in government because they are corrupt. And if you give us a chance, we're going to pursue them and bring them to justice. So by and large, the population kind of, they bought into that setup back then by the leader. The Dominica Labour Party took office, and it was sort of a dawn of a new day. A matter of fact, I remember clearly well that when they came in office in 2000 thereabout, there was this special service that they attended, a church service that they attended. And one of the prayerful words that were issued then was that, I'm not quoting them verbatim now, but basically it boiled down to, thank God that we are now on the scene because we have gotten rid of a very corrupt party. And so we're going to do all we can in our power to sort of get rid of corruption and to put the country back on track. That was the sense at the time. So there was this buzz, there was this atmosphere of hope for the general population as to, okay, here it is, you said a party was corrupt and you now came in as the beacon of hope. And so there was a lot of hope in the air, there was a lot of excitement, and so the country be on track and everything that goes with it. Lo and behold, that prime minister, I think he stayed in office about a year and something, he passed, he died in office. That's Rosie Douglas. Our next prime minister took over, that is Mr. Honorable Pierre Charles. He too passed suddenly. So we have had two prime ministers, they passed back to back in relatively quick succession. We now had on the scene, emerged on the scene, a gentleman by the name of Roosevelt Skerrit, who is still in office today. He took over the reins in 2003 on the death of Pierre Charles. I'm just giving you some background so you can kind of get a better appreciation of where the many folks on the live would want the conversation to go at this part of it thereof. Now, a lot of persons then, they had a lot of hope in a young man in the name of Roosevelt Skerrit. He coming in the scene, offering hope to the young people in particular, he being the youngest prime minister in the region. And so there was this upbeat, there was this, sort of up-tempo in the country. The 2005 general election that followed after, that I am saying, and I've said it many times, and I'll repeat it here this afternoon so that you can hear, that to me was the last, quote unquote, free and fair election we had in Dominica. Is in 2005. And you could well imagine why it was, and the ambience that sort of kind of got that to come around. In 2009, that was another general election. We started to see a change in terms of the whole political atmosphere in the country. And so from 2009 to 2019, the elections in Dominica have been not free, they have not been fair. And I say that to say, based on the activities that are happening on the ground during the elections, before the elections, and sometimes even after the elections. And so a lot of persons in Dominica, especially those in the opposition circles, opposition parties, those who are sympathetic to the opposition cause, they have been pointing out a number of occasions that this government, this Dominica Labour Party government, is corrupt. And there are examples that I can go by, and these are examples that were fleshed out in the public domain. For example, in 2009, thereabout 2010, I believe, there was this bean bubble scandal, whereby certain ministers of government, they were caught up in a scandal, whereby beans, rubbish beans, were purchased at higher prices, and it was a whole quote unquote melee-melange, whereby a lot of corrupt activities were said to be part and parcel of that transaction. To sort of save face in terms of making up with the public, there was some kind of acceptance by the persons that were part and parcel of that bean bubble scandal, we call it at the time, a repayment was made to the public. A rebate was made to the public in the sum of, I think, pretty close to $500,000. In that, the persons involved, they recognized and realized that they were caught red-handed. And so there was nothing more that they could do but to pay back the money. Obviously, it was the party that was in power. So the full extent of the law did not take its course in terms of prosecution and whatever it is. We have had a number of other situations as well where other ministers, for example, the Prime Minister and others, they have been dabbling in activities that, as I said before, could tantamount to corruption. So I want to ask you, based on saying all of that to you, what would you describe as corrupt activities? Can you give some details as to some activities that ministers, politicians, persons in high office can get themselves involved in that from GOPAC's standpoint would tantamount to corruption?
Well, that's a complex narrative you've given to me, but it ends with a straightforward question. To begin with, for anyone who is involved in international affairs of any kind, one of the challenges is that the world is a large and complex place. It's a culturally diverse place, and people tend to disagree in different societies about all manner of things. But there are a couple of aspects about corruption which are unusual. One is that in every culture I've ever witnessed, there's public revulsion against corruption. There's an idea that there is something called corruption and that it is unacceptable, that it is a kind of betrayal of the public trust. People might disagree, and they do disagree, about what constitutes corruption, and different societies have different norms. But there is no society in the world that does not have some version of the imperative, thou shalt not steal. Every society that exists has that basic idea hardwired into it. So that, to a certain extent, makes it not easy, but easier to come up with universal standards of what constitutes corruption. The definition that we at GOPAC tend to use is a definition that has been embraced by many institutions around the world. And that is, corruption is the misuse of public power or public resources for private benefit. So in effect, if you are taking money or power that belongs to the people, and you are using it to benefit yourself or your friends or your cronies or your fellow travelers, instead of benefiting the population at large, that is corruption. I would also say that corruption tends to have a giveaway characteristic, because when people are caught, they will often argue over whether what they were doing was in fact corrupt. But one of the key questions is, to my mind, key symptoms, is were you trying to hide what you were doing? People don't tend to engage in corrupt behavior out in the open. In some societies, especially in some societies with endemic corruption, that does happen, where a tyrant will just steal from his people and look them in the eye and say, what are you going to do about it? That's a little unusual. In most societies, even in societies with authoritarian governments, the corrupt actors try to operate from the shadows. They don't want other people to know what they're doing. So if you have a situation where someone who has charge of public resources or public power is using it to benefit himself or other individuals, and in particular, if he's using it in a way, if he's trying to hide what he's doing from his fellow citizens, to obscure it, to misstate it, to operate from jurisdictions where there's no oversight, then you can be pretty sure that whatever it is and whatever justification he wants to give, that amounts to corruption. One of the challenges in countries where society has come to accept corruption is trying to disentangle the idea of corruption from just the way politics are practiced. I'll take as an example a lot of post-Soviet states, that is, countries that emerged from the breakup of the Soviet Union. All of them are struggling with corruption. Every single post-Soviet state, especially Russia, the biggest of all post-Soviet states, are to a certain extent hamstrung by corruption. One of the reasons for that, a couple of reasons. One is that these are countries that have, from their time under Soviet occupation, a history of authoritarianism. a history
Yes.
where there is one person or a small group of people or one party that is in charge. And whenever you get concentrations of power, you always get corruption. The other aspect, though, is that the population itself has come to accept corruption because it was so woven into the way politics were carried out. But also, the population in many of those countries have contempt for the rule of law. In a country where your rulers are illegitimate, where the laws are unjust, it can become patriotic to break the law. So during the Soviet days, people felt it's my patriotic duty to break the law. It's my patriotic duty to get away with whatever I can get away with, because this is undermining an illegitimate government. I think that's a fair argument if you're being tyrannized over by an occupation. The problem for many of those countries was that when the Soviet Union fell and their countries now became democracies, that culture of getting away with whatever you can get away with did not leave. People continue to have a sense in society at large that only a fool doesn't steal, that this is the way they've always done it. Therefore, they will always try to get away with whatever they can. And perhaps worse, when they have seen local or national politicians behave in exactly that way, they have thought to themselves, either consciously or unconsciously, that's pretty much what I would do if I had access to that money and access to that power. So all this is a fairly roundabout way of saying that in Dominica, as in every country of the world, it's possible for people to disagree over what constitutes corruption. But I think in our heart of hearts, we all know what it is. It's when someone is taking something that belongs to others, whether it belongs to another group of people or to society at large, whether they're taking it for their own benefit, whether they're using power for the good of the people or for the good of themselves. And while it is easy and important that we point our fingers at those people and say, what you are doing is wrong, it's even more important that we don't allow ourselves to fall into a relationship of clientelism with those people, where we feel that we will turn a blind eye, either consciously or unconsciously, whether out loud or inside ourselves. We say to ourselves, I will turn a blind eye to what they're doing because they're also giving it, while they're stealing the loaf of bread, they're perhaps throwing me some crumbs, and I like those crumbs. Because in the end, that's your loaf of bread. They're stealing from you, even if they are trying to bribe you with the leftover crumbs from what they've stolen.
True. Much accepted based on your response there. You spoke of, you were alluding to some of the symptoms earlier, which I took note of. Are there any symptoms of note that when a country system is corrupt, that there are visibly signs to see around?
Oh, absolutely. And there's an organization called Transparency International that produces a very well-regarded document called the Corruption Perception Index. It's an attempt on their part to measure corruption in different countries.
Okay.
It's probably the best metric. It's imperfect because this is a hard thing to measure, but it's probably the best metric that's available. Some of the symptoms that they identify are, has anyone ever asked you for a bribe? Have you ever offered someone a bribe? So that at a very local level, at a very personal level, have you experienced corruption? Have you experienced those, and have you been a party to it? From a larger level, there are also issues around, is the wealth of the country being reflected in the standard of living of the people? I'm a great believer in the reality that there are no poor countries in the world. There are only poor populations. And there are many countries I could point to where the country is rich, but the people are poor. And the reason the people are poor is that their political leaders are stealing all the country's money, that they're making out like bandits while ordinary people live in abject poverty. But even the poorest country in the world, or even the state that has the least amount of money in the world, is not so poor that it can't afford to give its population a decent standard of living. If you live in a country where most of the people are poor, it is because your government is corrupt, because there's no country that isn't able to do better. Another aspect is whether there's a robust political culture of changes in parties or personalities who rule the government. Elections are necessary, but not sufficient condition for democracy and for free societies. Even I'll go back to the case of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had elections of a sort. They had periodic things they called elections, but there was only one candidate on the ballot. So you knew who was going to get elected. Even if a society has elections, they have to be free and they have to be fair. And the real sign of whether they are functioning is whether periodically there are changes in government, whether new parties come in or parties alternate. Because all human beings are imperfect. If you ever get a situation where year after year, election after election, generation after generation, it's the same person or the same party in office, then even if they're holding something they called elections, there's something amiss there. That is just not the way genuine democracies operate. And I would say that finally, one of the key symptoms is in particular how countries treat natural resources, because natural resources tends to be one of the key centers of corruption around the world. And by natural resources, I don't just mean extractive resources. So if you have a country that has oil, and oil is a big source of its wealth, pay attention to who controls the oil and where the oil money goes. If you have a country where a lot of the money is in mining, pay attention to who controls the mine. How are the miners and the mining companies connected to the government? And is that money staying in your society or is it going out? And as in a country like Dominica, I mean, Dominica is renowned across the world for its natural beauty. It's considered, to a certain extent, nature's playground of the world. That is a kind of natural resource. It's a beautiful country that people want to visit, that people want to enjoy. It has a climate and an environment that draws people from around the world. Who is benefiting from that activity? Where the proceeds of those natural activities, of the proceeds of the economic activities tied to its natural environment and its climate, who's getting that? Who owns the hotels? Who controls tourism? And what is the relationship between the people who are benefiting from those activities and the people who are in the corridors of power? All those things are areas where the people should pay attention. But again, the most important thing, I suppose, to ask ourselves, and this is a question of looking into ourselves rather than looking at others. If someone were to offer me a bribe today, or to offer my friend a bribe, do I believe that he would accept it or refuse? And if the answer is, well, I think most of my friends would accept the bribe, then you have to say to yourself, if that's true, then there's something wrong in the society and in the cultural norms. And we can't go about fixing corruption in our public institutions until we first address corruption in our societies and in ourselves.
That's a very, very, very succinct point you're making there, Akash, in that it's kind of opening my mind right now, in that the last point that you made, I took note when you said the owner sometimes is not only on the bribe bar, as it were, but it's those who are willing, readily available to accept the bribe. And so even right there, you have a problem as well.
Yes. Because we become part of the apparatus. We become complicit.
Yes.
And I mean, Caribbean countries have a tragic history of slavery, but there are all kinds of slavery. There's a kind of slavery where someone puts the chains on you, and there's a kind of slavery where you put the chains on yourself, where you hold the key, but somehow the person who's controlling you has convinced you not to turn the lock.
Wow, powerful indeed, powerful indeed. Folks, it is 5 minutes to the hour of 5 o'clock. We are here with Mr. Akash Maharaj. We're discussing the topic this afternoon, the all-important topic that some of us speak on a daily basis in Dominica, especially on our radio stations. And so this afternoon, we are going, much deeper, taking it step by step, as it were, discussing the signs, the symptoms, anything and everything that goes on with this word corruption. And so we'll be getting to some of your comments in just a bit for Mr. Maharaj in just a bit. But just before we go to the comments, someone is asking a very important question here on my private phone, in that they're asking me to ask you, what would you say, or what is your take on ministers of government, for example, who have unexplained wealth in terms of the topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, that too is, I'm glad you and your colleague have raised that, because I should have raised that in response to your question about symptoms of corruption.
Yes.
That is a classic symptom of corruption. Most countries pay their politicians well. Not many countries pay their politicians lavishly. And yet lots of countries have lavishly wealthy politicians. And it is reasonable to say to people, you have to explain, especially if you wield public power and you have control of public resources, you have to be public about your assets and your income. You have to explain where that money has come from. There should be a public registry in every country where ministers and members of parliament have to publicly declare how much money they have and where it came from. And if suddenly someone is enjoying a standard of living, is owning property in the country and abroad, is driving cars that cannot possibly be paid for with the amount of money he claims that he has, and he won't explain where that money came from, the public is entitled to conclude that those resources are the proceeds of crime. If we are all entitled to privacy as private individuals, but the moment that you accept public power, you give up some of that privacy. You have to give up some of that privacy because it is too easy to hide behind privacy to misuse public power. The bargain in becoming a politician, a public leader, is if you're going to wield public power as a public trust and have augmented power over the public, you have to have augmented accountability and transparency to the public. So yes, if you see politicians walking around with way more money than they can possibly explain from their public income, you have a right to know where that came from. And there are many countries that have laws on the book. They're called exactly that, unexplained wealth laws. That if someone has wealth and he cannot or will not explain where that came from, then that in itself is a crime. Even if it becomes impossible for the state to trace where did that money come from because the person has successfully covered his tracks, it is a crime to be in possession of large amounts of wealth whose origin you cannot or will not explain. And I would encourage any country that is serious about fighting corruption to enact such laws.
Yeah, indeed. And let me just, and thanks for your response, Akash, in that for that question. Let me just localize the conversation we're having to have you and the many persons listening have a better context as to how that is playing out in our country, Dominica, today. We have this Prime Minister in office, Roosevelt Skerrit, and these are factual situations that I'm telling you. They are not hearsays, they are not phantoms of my imagination, facts. The man who holds the seat of Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerrit, he has a property in his constituency of Vegas, that is on the northeast of Dominica, north of Dominica. At the time of building that house, it was said by him in the public domain that that house would have cost him 300,000 EC dollars, just under 100,000 US. What we were told and the information that surfaced months after he made that statement, whilst that building was in the foundation phase, it was already surpassing, or it had surpassed the $300,000 mark in foundation. As it is today, that building is up and it is erected. The local people on the ground, the surveyors, the evaluators, they put that house in the range of anywhere close to 3 million EC dollars in terms of worth. And that is a statement of fact. That's number one, as we're on the topic of unexplained wealth. And just for the purpose of the conversation, I'm just zeroing on the Prime Minister. There are other ministers around him who have similar wealth as well, but that will prolong the conversation too much. But I'm just using him as a prime example. This same man, Roosevelt Skerrit, he has a lot of properties around the island, both land and vehicles. They are basically unexplained. A matter of fact, it was said in the public domain, some persons, they just gifted it to him in public office for his good work. And even then, even when those properties were gifted, quote unquote, gifted to him, he did not declare these assets to an organization we have in Dominica called the Integrity in Public Office. That office, it's supposed to be holding officials accountable. Officials need to declare their assets. But I must say, alas, that office is basically like a lame duck. So that is on the property end and the vehicles end. We also have the situation where, as we speak presently, he is now coming down to the wire, as it were, where he's living in a mansion in an area called Mount Daniel. That is in a sort of high-end area in the parish of St. Paul, whereby the state, and hear me well, Mr. Akash, the state, the taxpayers of Dominica is paying, as we speak, a bill of 64,000 EC dollars for rental of that property for Roosevelt Skerrit to live in, he and his family. In October, November, thereabout, he said he will be leaving that property and be moving out from that property because the public has scrutinized that so much, and he and his family are under tremendous pressure, and so he will be moving out. But every month, $64,000 from the taxpayers have to be removed from the treasury to go towards, again, another very gray area in Dominica, where he said a man from Lebanon named Mr. Anthony Hayden, which is another topic of discussion, we'll not be touching that this afternoon, basically came to Dominica, built that house, and is renting that property over $60,000. Who in Dominica, the people are asking, that can have that kind of disposable income to rent a property for $60,000? Nobody. And so again, I will not go in there, but there are a lot of unanswered questions as it relates to that dwelling house, the real ownership of that dwelling house, and also the relationship between Anthony Hayden, that is the guy from Lebanese, and also the Prime Minister. It is alleged, a lot of persons are believing, based on how things are unfolding, that this house that he, the Prime Minister, and his government said is owned by Anthony Hayden, it is alleged it is the Prime Minister's own residence. So you understand the kind of shenanigans, the kind of gray areas that Dominicans are exposed to with this man at the helm for pretty close to 20 years now. He also have his wife as well in the government as we speak. I really don't know what ministry she holds, but she's there drawing money as a parliamentarian from the taxpayers of Dominica. Again, her election in the city, that is Roseau, she contested, that is the city of Dominica. That election, again, a lot of persons, myself included, we are saying a lot of bribery went on there, a lot of treating, and basically she was just made to purchase that election in the city wholesale, and she's sitting comfortably as a parliamentarian today. And so there are a number of other situations that I can point to in terms of unexplained wealth that this guy, Roosevelt Skerrit, has in his possession, and the Dominican public basically keep asking questions time and time again as to how you came about having those properties, having those vehicles, having those monies, having those unaccounted monies in your possession. And it is you. A matter of fact, one of our past prime ministers in the name of Edison James, he asked this current one, question to that effect. What is it? What is it with you? Can you explain? And I want to respect your ears. Dominicans, they know that already, but I just want to respect your ears in terms of the response. Here Roosevelt said to the past prime minister, it is not your damn business where Roosevelt Skerrit gets his money. go to hell. And he repeat that go to hell 3 times for emphasis. And so you see the kind of quagmire, you see the kind of situation that Dominicans are caught up with a prime minister who doesn't want nobody to ask him about his wealth and about his dealings as prime minister, not as a citizen, not as a common citizen, as prime minister. That is the kind of arrogance, that is the kind of response sometimes that goes with it in terms of telling Dominicans, go to hell. Nobody don't have to know where he gets his money from. And you know, it is just like a recurring decimal where this unexplained wealth and cannot account properly for Dominican dollars where this prime minister is concerned. So I just wanted to kind of lay that in your lap so that you could have a better idea of what is going on with us in Dominica. We know in the region of corruption as well, as you said, all countries are susceptible to some kind of corruption. But I can tell you, Dominica is a little boiling or melting pot as it pertains to corrupt activities. And the evidence is there to show.
And that is, well, that's a lot. I guess I would say that that quotation that you just offered me, that it's none of your business. Obviously, it's always the business of the people as to where their leaders get their money. And there's some people who will say, I don't want to expose my personal life to that kind of scrutiny. I can understand that. Then don't go into public office. The nature of public office is that the risks of corruption are so high that the levels of accountability must be commensurately higher. And you must give up some of your privacy to reassure the people that you are not misusing that power. But I guess ultimately the question is, it's not, do I think this is acceptable? It's, do the people of Dominica think it's acceptable? If you think that this is acceptable, I think that's unfortunate. But if you don't, then you have to either put pressure on your government and your members of parliament to bring in laws that require people to disclose their assets and their sources of wealth, and also that has integrity commissions that have real teeth. I mean, there are integrity commissions in many parts of the world, many countries, that have rules and procedures and requirements, but have no consequences if politicians break those rules. And if there are no consequences, then really there are no rules. It should be, if you as a citizen of your country fail to file your taxes and did so maliciously and willfully and wantonly, there would be consequences for you. There would be a knock on the door and there would be the risk of prosecution. It's not right that the laws that apply to ordinary citizens are stronger than the laws that apply to politicians. And that is unfortunately often the case. And ultimately, I mean, the remedy in any democracy, if you are unhappy with a government, is to change that government. But that is a question for the people of Dominica, not for me. I would simply say to them, to yourself, that it's up to you as a democracy to decide what it is that you want. And it's not up to you to negotiate with your political leaders. It's up to you to tell your political leaders to reward them if they do what you want and to punish them if they don't.
Okay, Mr. Maraj, thank you very much. I like to be true to my word. So let us go now to some of the comments that have been generating here for some time and to see if we can take some of them here so that you can respond to them, okay? Mm-hmm. It says here by Lucia James, what about the other one he's building right now? Lucia James is asking me to basically apprise you of something I forgot in terms of the same prime minister. Presently, he's still building. He's in building mode as we speak of building another property adjacent to the mansion. Okay. So the mansion that is under serious scrutiny, he's building another property. We're being told have basement and everything that goes with it. It's in foundation stage as we speak, but it is adjacent to the mansion. And let me just give you a kind of more descriptive analysis as to what goes on there. This property, the mansion that he's now renting, the property he's building is adjacent to that, as I said. And these two properties, they are fenced in with a wall, a perimeter wall that goes right around that building. And outside of that wall, that perimeter wall, they are laden with mosaic tiles. That gives you an idea of the type and scope of work that go on there. And, you know, one is left to wonder exactly what is happening there. Yes, go ahead.
If I may ask, have there been questions asked in Parliament about these things?
A number of questions have been raised in Parliament about a number of issues, sir, but to tell you the plain truth, when you spoke of before Dominicans living in a democracy, and it is the people in any democracy that matter, should and can have the responsibility to change the government ever so often if things are going awry. In terms of responding to that, I must tell you straight up, Dominica, if you Google Dominica, you will see the type of governance is democratic. But what we are going through, and that is, I'm not buttering it up, I'm not cushioning it up. What we are going through is nothing but undemocratic as it relates to our country, Dominica. A matter of fact, some persons are suggesting to remove this government from office legally, that is now, with ballots, the constitutional way. That is like climbing up Golgotha's hill.
Okay.
It is like climbing up Golgotha's hill with some heavy weight on your back. So removing any government is the pride and joy of any democratic nation. They can remove them, put them, you know, but in Dominica, it has become so insurmountable that some of the persons who want to do that, they are helpless. And so what goes on is certainly not democratic. There are a number of questions, as you asked me earlier on, are raised in Parliament. And in Parliament, the eyes always have it. So you have the other ministers are like rubber stamps. They don't go down deep, they don't clarify, they don't explain to the Dominican people, especially when the opposition forces in Parliament ask the relevant question. They just brush it off. A matter of fact, our parliamentary proceedings, I may send you a recording of the next one, or maybe 2 or 3 gone, so that you can hear for yourself what goes on there in terms of the debate, the level of discourse that goes on there. It starts off well, I must say, with the protocols and the, you know, the announcements and the notices and the whatever. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty of the matter that matters to the public in terms of the question and answer and the transparency and everything that goes with it, this place turns into, I don't want to dehumanize or degrade fishmongers because they are professions in it, they are professionals in their own right, yes. But the kind of rancor, diabolic talk that goes on in there, it's really not worth listening to. A matter of fact, some persons in Dominica, they just basically turn off their radio because they know exactly what to expect when that time, that debating time comes around. You know, it's a lot of name calling, a lot of who is ugly, who is this, who is that, and who doesn't have a job. It's like who's lazy, and it's you know, it's really not good for any democracy what goes on in what is supposed to be the highest law body making body in our land. It is not, and I cannot put it any lighter for you. I have to be true to you, true to the discussion we're having, because a lot of persons on the live, they know exactly what's going on. So if I tell you anything other than what I'm saying to you, I'll be lying to you.
Okay.
There's a systematic level of corruption that goes on in government. They control the media. There's control over everything you can think of. Even the religious circles, there's that long arm there as well. That some of our pastors, some of our priests, some of our clergy, they just cower, they just bow, they just fall in, to the dictates of the political power. And you know, it's not good. It's not good.
When you say that you believe that changing government would be insurmountably difficult, is that because you feel that there aren't free and fair elections? So that if, let's say an election were held today, and a majority of people voted to change government. Sorry, let me back up. If an election were held today, are you saying that what your concern is that a majority of people would not bother to vote to change government? Or are you saying that your concern is that even if a majority of people voted to change government, that the electoral process has been captured, and so that's not the result that would be reported?
Well, your latter speaks to more of the situation that is happening on the ground. Your latter analysis in that what has been happening with our electoral process is a situation that is so rigged that even before the official polls they are counted, persons already know who won, or let me take back that statement, who stole that constituency or who stole that seat. And that is how it is being done. A matter of fact, on the day of election, you have, you know, surrogates of the ministers in whichever constituency passing around, and I saw it for myself, so I can speak to that, passing around with little paper bags of money, $500, $1,000, $1,500, whatever it is, inducing persons to vote. Before the elections in Dominica, you have this one-ton fete, whereby persons even end up going to vote on the day drunk, literally drunk, because the night before or the week before they have been consuming so much alcoholic beverages that it's just a mess. So they go in there with not a sane mind to do an X or a cross, whatever you call it, in the interest of country. And that is how it is. So the elections are bought before, during, and sometimes even after, because some persons have been told they get paid after the election. So it is not as simple, it is not as facile, as the French would say, for Dominicans to say, okay, we have had enough of this party, let us decide on putting another party, another team of persons in place to run the. It is not that. It is easier said than done. Much easier said than done.
Well, Dominica is part of the international system. It is part of the Commonwealth. Have civil society organizations thought about, or have they done this in the past? Have they invited or asked election monitors to come in to the country before, during, and after elections, at least to report on what those international monitors see? That would be something worth considering.
That's a very nice question you ask. In that, yes, I must admit, the government of the day do normally ask international observers to come in and take a look, scrutinize, monitor, report on the elections that is happening on the day. What I find that is happening, and that is something that, again, the people of the region must fix as it pertains to these monitors, in that there's a fundamental flaw in that. I'm going to give you a case in point. Last election, that is in December of 2019, the OAS mission, they came in, the CARICOM observers, they came in, and I think the Commonwealth Secretariat, 3 groups, they won the ground supervising the elections. Well, not supervising, but monitoring. But what struck me was that on the reporting of the CARICOM, that group, I was there at the ceremony, they never made mention about a number of chartered flights that were brought in and flew out with voters. And a lot of persons are saying that these voters came in to vote for and on behalf of the incumbent. One of the reporters asked the observer mission lady, the head who was reporting, can they report on anything as it pertains to the number of planes that they saw, the response to the reporter then was by the head of the Carrier Commission was, their primary duty and role is basically to report what goes in and around the polling station on the day.
Yeah.
So I understood what she said in terms of their role, but to me that answer was insufficient in that if you have certain things, certain machinations that are going on that are affecting what you are witnessing at the polls on the day, as a person or a mission true to your mission, you should be able to give some kind of reporting on that as well. But just to confine your reporting to your little space in and around the area, you saw no violence, nobody was dragged to vote, you know, you didn't, that's fine. But there are other external circumstances that defeats your purpose in terms of your mission. And so that is one of my big issues that I have with the observer mission. People, when they come, let's say 3-4 days before, a matter of fact, I am saying, based on my seeing and noticing on the ground, when these persons are invited to come into the country by the powers that be, I can comfortably say, Akash, that the election is already in the bag. And so what they're coming to witness, it's a staged performance. And these observers, it is lamentable, but they are falling right into the trap that is set before them every 4.5 years or every 5-year cycle.
That's interesting. Cool. Okay, thank you.
I know you're getting some food for thought. I guess you'll ponder some of them after we're done. But thank you very much for listening and taking note. Let me get to some more comments here as we move along. Let me see. The comments are coming in fast and furious here. Okay, John Alfred is writing. They say, that is the observer mission she's talking about, that the election was free, but not necessarily fair. And again, these are words that, you know, these people come up with to satisfy the population. And yes, they did say the election was free, but it was not necessarily fair. And, you know, you being a professional, you can read a lot into their type and use of language.
I can, but I'm curious to hear your interpretation of that. In what way was it unfair?
Okay. The election was, what they said, the election was free, but not necessarily fair. Let me explain that to you, how we, the Dominican people, are understanding this language. In that the election was free on the day, as I said before, you know, the observers, they are reporting that they did not see anybody being forced to vote. Nobody didn't hold a gun at anybody's head and force them to vote. So there was a certain level of freeness in the election. Persons come on the day, they queued up in the line very early. You know, they went through the process. So you looking at it with your quote unquote naked eye, you will call that process, you know, a relatively free process. When they said it was not necessarily fair, that is where now we are suggesting, or we are saying that based on the number of allegations that they keep hearing about the bribing of the electorate, the treating of the electorate, the on the day buying of votes, everything, the squalor that goes into the election, that is where these reporters are saying it may not necessarily be fair, in that we cannot count so much for the fairness of it. What we can count for is for the freeness of it. And so these words have a lot to be, you know, you can juggle it how you want, but that is their choice of words. Then it was free. Yes, the election, the process was free, but not necessarily fair.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep. Let me see if we could get down to some more comments here. Let me see. Ezra Winston is writing here. Again, one of the observers at the last election in the person of Lazy Byron was contracted to draft electoral reform for the same government he helped install. Where Ezra Winston is taking us into another aspect of the electoral process. But basically, let me just paraphrase here in the interest of time. After the last election, okay, let me track back. Dominica, Miss Akash, we have no voter's ID card in Dominica. So you, Akash Maharaj, you can come to Dominica. Once your name is on that list, you can vote. How your name appears on that list, then heaven knows. So once your name is on the list, so there's no card that you have to present. So there's no identity requirement. You just show up, and once there is a name Akash Maharaj, even if it is not the Akash Maharaj, but you're given a ballot, you vote and you go out. Mm-hmm. When let's say the real or the right Akash Maharaj comes in to vote, that name is already ruled out or lined out. That person is now given a form to fill as it pertains to them making a complaint. These complaints are taken to court or supposed to be taken to court or taken up legally. That process itself, it's another long drawn out process. We have still in our courts election petitions, election matters that are irregular in nature or were irregular in nature all the way back in 2014. So another election cycle has come and gone, and some of the matters that pertain to 14, it is still in the legal system waiting to be ventilated. Okay. So it gives you a picture as to how clogged the system is. So we have no ID for voting. Secondly, there is no campaign finance laws in place.
I see. So there's no limit to how much people can spend or what they can spend it on.
None at all. As we speak, none at all. So in Dominica, the election has been going for some time now to the highest bidder, the person or the party with the deepest pockets. And that is where the incumbency will always have an advantage.
And are political parties allowed to accept money from non-citizens?
From?
Non-citizens, from people outside of Dominica.
Mr. Raj, our money comes from our money that is being spent in the elections. It is alleged come from Dubai, come from Malaysia, come from India, come from all over the world. Come from all over the world with persons that have some kind of vested interest in, whichever party they want to prop up. So there's nothing to say that a political party cannot take $2 million, $3 million from wherever it is. No. So we have no, yes. So we have no campaign finance reforms in place, no laws in place, no legislation in place to say what is the cap on spending. We have no proper way of being identified. The media in Dominica that I spoke of on a while ago, it is compromised in that the incumbent party, they have at their disposal the nation station, that is the Dominica Broadcasting Station. They also have at their disposal the GIS, that is Government Information Service. They also have at their disposal another local radio station named Kyrie FM. They also have at their disposal a number of press organizations, print media organizations. They also have at their disposal a number of surrogates that go out there and push the message of the incumbent. What I must add in terms of trying to balance the equation, which by no means will balance it off, the opposition in Dominica have at their disposal for some time one radio station in Dominica, that is one called Q95, whereby, quote unquote, it is an open door policy that all and sundry, be the incumbent or the opposition, can come to that station to bring forth their message. So you have the imbalance, you have one where the opposition, quote unquote, can have their views expressed and their message passed, versus the barrage of the incumbency that have basically 90% of the media lockdown. And so you can well imagine the kind of, how you call it, bombardment that goes on there where the population is concerned, so that persons are going to cast a ballot, but they're not properly hearing from both sides. And so obviously it is said, repetition builds reputation. So the more you hear something, it most likely will stick.
Okay. Okay.
There are other matters as well that the government of the day just abuse the country resources, as you were alluding to earlier, whereby it just goes all out, spend and give persons homes, give persons whatever it is in a kind of an atmosphere that is not fair play. They tend to give persons who are in their mind supporters of them. And so that is why I said before, the election most times is rigged way before the day of the voting itself. And that is what goes on in Dominica as we speak.
Okay.
So the process which any democracy affords its citizens to remove and to install a government, I can tell you, Akash, that process is severely compromised in Dominica. Hence my reason for saying the Dominican public, we are climbing up Golgotha's hill with weights on our back.
So what do you think is the path forward for Dominica? If you feel that the electoral system has been captured so that the people are either not sufficiently motivated, or in the alternative that the process itself has been perverted, or that the effect of money, especially foreign money, can distort the results, if all those things are combining, what would you do to bring about political reform within your country? If you had a magic wand.
If I had a magic wand, well, I certainly, if I had a magic wand, I would start fresh, in that some of the organizations in Dominica, some of the institutions that's supposed to be working for and on behalf of the state, these organizations, I would give them much more teeth to operate. They are there in the physical. For example, the electoral office. Well, yeah, the electoral office is one, I'll get to it in a while, but I touch on the one who's supposed to hold officials responsible. It will come.
The Integrity Commission?
The integrity in public office. That is there. That is there, yes. But as to it being true to its mission or its function, it is basically like a lame duck. A matter of fact, let me just give you a case in point. That commission had 7 members on it before. We had like a person representing the legal fraternity, the accounting fraternity, members of the opposition, members of the government side, 7 members. There was a case brought against, again, the prime minister, whereby the same unexplained wealth that we're talking about, and with his power that he wields, he basically disbanded that IPO of 7 members. He disbanded that and had one to come about with 5 members. And that case that was before them, that case was just, it just evaporated.
Okay. So he was able to, you're saying the prime minister is able to replace the commissioners investigating him?
That is what has transpired in Dominica.
Okay.
So the Integrity in Commission, the Integrity in Public Office, that organization it had persons on there that could, quote unquote, navigate the waters where murky matters are done. Systematically, there was a breakdown in that organization, and then a new one installed with less members. And in addition, the case that was there before it evaporated in thin air, as I said. So that one is no more. You also have in parliament, because your GOPAC organization basically deals with parliamentarians. In parliament, we in Dominica have what we call the PAC, PAC, that is the Public Accounts Committee, whereby that committee is supposed to sort of investigate matters that comes before parliament as it pertains to transparency and good governance. The leader of opposition is supposed to be the leader of the PAC, of that organization. But again, it is an organization that is there, but it is without teeth. In that on numerous occasions, the leader of the opposition normally asks questions or requests information from other members of parliament who are supposed to be reporting to that PAC. And nothing. The information is just not forthcoming. And it is nothing or very little that is done to these persons who are requested of information that are just not forthcoming. So at that high body in parliament, it is so, it is not good. You have another body in Dominica, which I must tell you, the police in Dominica, our police, our lawmen in Dominica. So we now come out of the quote unquote political circles now. And we are now with an organization that's supposed to be working for everybody in a fair manner. Even the police, Akash, the police is very, very corrupt, some of them. They are basically working fun on behalf of the political directorate. A matter of fact, some of them move only when the political directorate give instructions. I don't know if you heard of a case where a gentleman from India bought a citizenship in Antigua, that is Mr. Mehul Choksi. I don't know if you heard of that name.
No.
No. Mehul Choksi is an Indian diamond guy, a diamond chair they call him. Basically he had his dealings with India, and the India bank wanted him for some scam. He came to Antigua, bought a citizenship from Antigua, and mysteriously, that Choksi guy, Indian guy, ended up in Dominica. And the Choksi guy, is claiming, he's still claiming that he ended up Dominica against his will illegally. Whoever kidnapped him and brought him to Dominica in order that he be transported back to India to answer whatever charges there is his name. That is a request from the Indian government. And I can tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, the police that I am now on now with you, they were culpable in getting Mr. Choksi to Dominica. A matter of fact, when he came to Dominica, it is alleged that Choksi is saying on tape on record that the police commissioner then acting, Mr. Lincoln Cobbett, met him on the shores where he was docked in the north, brought him into police cells and had him there against his will for 3 or 4 days. And nobody in Dominica, not the media, nobody knew he was there. And it was only when that information was leaked to yours truly, and I leaked it out to the media and other persons, only then that Mr. Choksi's name surfaced in Dominica as a wanted man, wanted by India, and he's in Dominica in custody. So Mr. Akash, I can tell you, the state of affairs in Dominica, it will certainly not take one program for us to go down into the real meat of things. I know I may be boring you, but I must kind of lay the foundation as to what we the people are suffering in Dominica. And so my apology.
You're not boring me at all. The question that is in my mind, and is always in my mind in conversations like this, is what can you do about it? What do you do about it? The situation you've described sounds very serious. I suppose one of the questions in my mind that it raises for me is, how is the public responding to it? So is there a sense, you've discussed many different issues. I understand that they all accumulate. How is the public responding? Do they feel outraged? Do they feel angry? Do they feel resigned and cynical? How do they feel?
There's a mixed set of emotions. Some persons are very angry. Some persons are very, there's this anxiousness over the population sometimes. Some persons, I must tell you as well, they basically just give up. They are basically just give up hope, because after 20 years of any situation, and at that political situation, that seems like it is not ending. A lot of persons are basically just throwing the towel and say, it is what it is. Que sera, sera.
That's not unusual, I'm afraid. But where do you think the balance of opinion is? Do you think that the things you have described, are they building a sense of social outrage, or do you think that the people are being worn down?
It is building a sense of outrage, I must admit, because if you listen to our local talk in Dominica on a daily basis, you will hear a number of persons, including myself sometimes. We go out there and ventilate whatever we are feeling inside. So there is that sense of anger. There's that sense of the political directorate not doing good by the people. And so there's the need to do better. So you always have that constant agitation back and forth. But as to how it plays out in terms of the incumbency holding that grip or maintaining that grip, then your guess is as good as mine. But for how it has been playing out, then some persons, as I said, basically just say, we have seen enough, we can do no more. So there's a sense of hopelessness. What's that?
When is your next election?
The next election is constitutionally due in 2020, what? 22, 24, about it, 2024. Constitutionally due.
2 years from now. Okay.
Yeah. But I must tell you, there's the talk of a snap election. There's a talk of a snap election. And we are seeing the signs of that playing out as we speak as well. Let me get to some more comments. A lot of comments here. Okay. This man here, Marshall Lawrence, is writing, Sacred Parliament was invaded by security forces with arms. And that is a situation that he is alluding to that happened when, again, as I reported to you before, the kind of a behavior that parliaments descends into, the kind of very chaotic scene. That is what he's reporting, that the security personnel, they basically had to come in parliament and take charge, promised at the time to jail all the opposition members in there and arrest them and do all kind of things. So, as I said before, it's really, it can get really chaotic. And I will not be surprised if one day that some really nasty things break out in parliament. I wouldn't be surprised. Because the atmosphere that is in there, it can be very, very fiery sometimes. Boy, lots and loads of comments. This one says, love to tell him about the need for election reform. We are on that as we speak. They did say the election was free, but not necessarily fair. We dealt with that already. Lucia James said, what about the night, the election? What about the night of the election? They brought down the RSS. Mr. Mara, I should tell you the plain truth. I would really like you to, quote unquote, commit yourself for us to have another discussion, because if I go into all these comments, we will never finish that conversation tonight. All I can tell you in a nutshell, you can go through the comments when we're done, and you can get a good snapshot of where the people's head is at. But if I have to go through each and every item there, it will take us up to maybe 1 o'clock tomorrow morning to finish that conversation.
Why don't you tell me what the RSS is?
The RSS represents the Regional Security
Service,
yes. That is a body in the region, Dominica, Antigua, Barbados, St. Lucia. They have this force that, let us say, if the local police in any one of these jurisdictions cannot deal with a matter, especially violent in nature, then that leader of that country where that is happening at the time, they normally would call on the RSS, that is this external force, to come and help beef up their local force on the ground. Mm-hmm. And what that person is alluding to, it was in 2019, there was this demonstration, protest type situation in an area on the west coast of Dominica called Salisbury, where the people were basically demonstrating for their rights. That is just before the election. And Roosevelt scared, he called in the RSS, and he told them basically there was this surge of violence that was unattainable here, and his forces couldn't deal with it. They came in, and when they came in, an American got shot. Live rounds were fired. An American got shot. A Haitian got shot as well. And the whole place was very tear gassy in nature. The whole place, they've just unleashed tear gas. Mm-hmm. In the wee hours of the morning, like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. The whole place was just engulfed with gas. And a lot of persons were screaming, a lot of babies, a lot of persons, some persons are suspecting even died, especially the elderly, after they inhale those toxic fumes. And Dominica is very, 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 it's a lovely country, nature-wise, but Akash, what goes on here, it is not good. It is not good. And so what I want to ask, apart from the parliamentarians in Dominica asking you guys at go back to, let's say, come in or be part of the organization, are there any other avenues available to Dominicans that you guys know of that we could sort of tap into to kind of get redress to our situations?
There always is, especially for smaller countries. There is commensurately greater influence for international institutions and international agencies. So let me kind of start from the outside and work my way in. You mentioned you're concerned that there are political actors at the highest levels who are enjoying lifestyles that cannot be explained by money that they are earning through legitimate public sources. In my experience, if that's the case, if you have senior ministers or heads of governments or heads of state who are involved in high levels of corruption, a lot of their money does not remain in the country, especially if it's a small country. A lot of the money ends up in foreign bank accounts, in tax havens, but also in large countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, France. People with a lot of money, even illicit money, like to holiday in those states. Those countries have laws that say explicitly that if even $1 of corrupt money ends up in one of their financial institutions, they have jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute the corrupt. I'm sure you've heard recently that the Prime Minister of the British Virgin, or the Premier rather, of the British Virgin Islands, Andrew Fahey, was arrested in the United States for drug trafficking. Now, it would be improper for me to comment on whether he's innocent or guilty. I would simply say that's a very serious charge. And if he was involved in drug trafficking, it is remarkable that he was not arrested by the police in the British Virgin Islands. He was arrested as a result of an investigation, a prosecution, and a decision by the American government, because they allege that he was trying to transport drugs in and out of their country. In an analogous way, if there are political actors who are involved in large-scale corruption in Dominica, they're almost certainly moving some of their money in and out of the United States. And that would create an opportunity for the American government and American institutions to take an interest in this. So I would counsel anyone who feels that might be a risk to contact the US representative in Dominica, the US Justice Department, the State Department. And because of the way these public service institutions are organized in the United States, there's always an ambitious investigator and an ambitious prosecutor who's looking for a high profile case that will make his or her career, and prosecuting a high level political actor is precisely those kinds of cases. So you might find that if there is a trail of breadcrumbs that passes through Britain or the United States, you're likely to find some interest in those countries to go after those individuals. From a larger level, in terms of structural institutions, money that might be flowing into Dominica as a result of assistance or support from international institutions, that opens up the possibility of international scrutiny, because candidly, you'll find that people outside of Dominica aren't particularly bothered if there are people stealing the money of Dominicans, but they are bothered if there are people in Dominica stealing money from the European Union or from Africa or from Asia. Europeans, Africans, and Asians will be upset by that. And so again, the opportunity to start conversations with those institutions that provide funding for projects in Dominica about augmented scrutiny, especially of specific individuals, to ensure that the money that's being put into Dominica is reaching its intended purpose. The other thing is that, in my experience, even in very large cases of corruption where the entire edifice has been brought down, it almost never starts with attacking the core actors. It's usually the case that, there are lots of people pulling at threads, and it just happens that one of those threads unravels the entire garment. That one small thing leads to one person trying to protect himself, so he gives evidence against someone higher up in the chain. That person gives evidence, and the next thing you know, you've uncovered a massive government-wide scandal. That is another avenue. And I guess finally, you mentioned that Dominica is part of several international institutions, as all countries are: the Commonwealth of Nations, the Organization of American States. All these bodies have, and CARICOM, all these bodies, they're not especially strong in terms of imposing high standards of human rights and probity, but they do have mechanisms. They do have anti-corruption measures, anti-corruption standards, and international anti-corruption oversight activities. Raising these issues with those institutions, at a minimum, will increase the temperature and the pressure on political actors in Dominica.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Maharaj, again, for at least pointing us or helping to point us in a direction that some solutions or attempted solutions can be sought. I want to thank you very profusely for that. I see we are up to our 6 o'clock hour. It's 5:56, so we have like 4 or 5 minutes with you, and I really don't want to keep you longer than the scheduled time, because I know you are a very busy man. In terms of you pointed us to institutions out there, but how would you, based on your experience, help motivate or energize or inspire Dominicans now to help deal with Dominica's problem?
As we were discussing at the very start of our conversation, that is the most important factor and the most difficult one. How do you create social norms that are intolerant of corruption? How do you create a social movement. And really, that really is the most important thing, because if the people don't care, then no amount of political scrutiny or outside scrutiny is going to make a difference. If the people are complicit in their own subjugation, then there's almost nothing else you can do. So when I look at the countries where these things have been successful, there's no one common thread. So I'll give you one common approach. So I'll give you some examples. Poland is an interesting case. When it was still, again, under the Soviet Union, the reason it was able to succeed in pushing off authoritarianism, whereas most other countries at the time were not, is in part because it had two strong institutions that other communist countries didn't. It had strong trade unions, especially based around the docks. And those were important places that brought together workers and were able to menace the government. It also had a strong faith tradition. The Roman Catholic Church in Poland was and still is very strong. And I know we are at a juncture in history where people are very skeptical about religion, and lots of organized churches have exposed corruption within their own institutions. I'm very much aware of that. It's still the case that faith and faith groups, because they speak directly to questions of what is right and wrong, what makes a decent society, they have the capacity to change social norms. And for me, one of my personal heroes, I have a few, but one of them is undoubtedly Martin Luther King Jr. And Martin Luther King Jr. could not have been Martin Luther King Jr. if he hadn't been Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. The fact that he was a man whose job was to think about moral issues, to communicate moral issues, and to rally people to moral and ethical causes. That is what took him from being just another civil rights activist to one of the greatest civil rights activists of this or any time. So I don't know if faith institutions are strong in Dominica, but if they are, that is a place. And again, we're at a junction in history when a lot of faith institutions are very reluctant to become involved in issues that look like political issues. But when political issues have an impact on the basic well-being of their flock, I would say they have an obligation to do that. Another aspect is in self-help groups. So this is a slightly curious example, but the Republic of Georgia, so not the US state, but the Republic of Georgia in Western Asia, had an exceptionally corrupt police force. And the president there tried and tried and tried to get rid of it, to reform the police, and he just couldn't. It was just, they were basically an organized crime syndicate. And he just decided, all right, I'm going to fire the entire police force. And he did. And what was remarkable, and start over. So he got rid of the traffic police and said, we're just going to build a new police force from the ground up. And that was remarkable in itself. But the more remarkable thing is that the fact that the police, suddenly there were no police officers giving traffic tickets, for example. That didn't mean the population woke up the next day and everyone started driving on the wrong side of the road and crashing their cars into one another. It meant that people realized they had to take responsibility themselves. It wasn't because someone was going to come and get them. They had to act within the confines of the law for their own sake. And that is a historically important example of building a community based around mutual ethics and mutual regard for social standards, because the community itself is organized in activity. I'm sure that there are lots of things that need to be done in Dominica. If the community itself can organize around this, it helps to create a sense that there are rules of conduct that we in the community are going to observe, not because we have to, but because we recognize that it's in our best interest. And I guess the last thing I will say is, although we live in an age that sneers at the power of individuals, I really think that individuals matter. People matter. Our choices matter. Our abilities as individuals to model moral and ethical behavior, that matters. And the reason we revere or admire people like Martin Luther King Jr. or Nelson Mandela or Archbishop Desmond Tutu is precisely because they are so rare, but they're not unique. There is a Nelson Mandela in Dominica, just as there is a Nelson Mandela in Canada. There are several. The question is, are we as society, are those people going to step forward, and are we as societies going to look to them? I guess I would say each of us has it in himself or herself to be a kind of Nelson Mandela. We have to make the choice to do so.
Yes, indeed. Final comment here just before we go, Brother Akash, in that this person has been very consistent this afternoon. And I want to end with one of her comments. Yes, her comment, Sky Libla. Sky Libla says, Dominicans don't understand their history, nor their value, nor their power. And so they allow the loudest and most popular to control them. They don't think independently. They don't create. They don't lead. Sort of taking a very sarcastic twist, though it may be the truth from Leblanc, but a very sarcastic twist. So again, in terms of your comment, the last comment that you just made, the people matter. And so it is the people of Dominica to basically help Dominica grow. And so all what you have said this afternoon, it cannot, or they cannot be accomplished without the people being active participants in that, what they call democracy.
Absolutely.
Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I know from that comment that you just read, that's someone who has become very cynical about the country. And, you know, I can understand that. There's cynicism everywhere and in all countries. And the worse the situation is, the easier it is to become cynical. I would say this, though. The way you feel about the frustration that you feel about corruption, in a way, that frustration lurks in the heart of every Dominican, of every human being. It's a question of waking it. And for all of us who feel, I remember the Arab Spring revolutions. And those were countries, the Arab Spring states, were countries that had real tyrannies, real autocracies. So brutal tyrants ruled those countries. And when the end came for them, it came overnight. I mean, literally overnight. Those people went to bed with all the money, all the power, all the weapons. And in the morning, they were being led off to the gallows by their people. And that, having observed that process, it really taught me something that I think I've tried to raise and I've tried to remember myself. And that is that the corrupt are not strong. They are not made strong by the proceeds of their corruption. The corrupt are weak, and they live in dread of the day when the people will wake up to the fact that we, the people, have the power. Every one of those tyrants in the Arab Spring states went to bed at night thinking to himself, I wonder if tomorrow is going to be the day. I wonder if tomorrow is going to be the day when the people have had enough. I wonder if tomorrow is going to be the day when they rise up. And there came a day when that day was the day. It's easy to feel cynical. I often feel cynical in my work. And when we feel cynical, we feel hopeless and we feel powerless. But that's exactly how corrupt actors want us to feel. They want us to feel that we can't do anything, because if we believe we can't do anything, we won't do anything. The truth is, they want us to feel that way because we have the power and not them. The power that they have stolen from us, and we can take it back.
True. I cannot agree with you more. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Maharaj, for blessing us this afternoon here on this Civic Vibe social media platform with your presence, that is, and also your professionalism and your wisdom. I want to thank you very much. I know a lot of persons on the live, they would maybe want to thank you personally, but they don't have that opportunity. So on their behalf, I want to thank you very much for coming out tonight and basically just saying it as it is. I know it is a very timely, it is a very refreshing discussion, so that I am hoping, based on what you said here this afternoon, something may stick, and that will be to the benefit of Dominica and Dominicans by extension. Finally, before we let you go, I want to thank a lady in Antigua and Barbuda, that is Cleon Attil, Dr. Cleon Attil, who basically put me in contact with you. And I must say that based on the time we have been speaking, I am enjoying every moment with you in terms of the wisdom that I'm getting from you. So I want to thank Dr. Attil in a very profuse way as well, for she having the confidence in me to putting me onto you so that you can speak to a great extent, not just to me, but to the greater Dominican public. Again, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you very much. So we'll keep the line of communication open, Brother Akash, and we will sure be very much interested to having you back sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, Dominicans, that is it. Thank you very much. Those of you in the region, those of you further afield as well. Thank you very much. It is already, what, 5 minutes past 6 o'clock. Let me see, let's make sure that time. Yes, it is about 5 minutes past 6, thereabout. We have been speaking to well-known guru in the international world, Brother Akash Maharaj. Very interesting conversation we have had here this afternoon. I know lots of you enjoyed it. But what will his words mean this afternoon to you if you did not put some of them into practice in your own little corner, in your own little community, in your own little space? Try to put into practice what you heard this afternoon. And for sure, Brother Maharaj will be a much happier individual by him knowing that you did not just listen, but you put some of what he said into practice. Again, Brother Maharaj, thank you very much. We look forward to talking to you very, very soon. Thank you once more.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, Dominicans, it's about that time. Let me say, let me make an apology for the co-host here. That is Paula Celestine. She was not there with us today. Paula sent me a note. Remember, it's Mother's Day, people. Paula said she was, kind of busy today preparing lunch and everything. It should be the other way around, eh? But Paula said to me, Lofty, I'm very tired today and I really cannot make it. I'd love to be there to spend the time with the people as always, but I cannot be there today. So Paula sent her apology for not being present here with you guys today. So on her behalf, I want to apologize for she not being here. But again, it's Mother's Day, so we can give Paula some slack, all right? But she said to me, Lofty, I will be listening. I'll be tuned in from wherever I at. So Paula, a special good evening to you. I know you too did enjoy the program this afternoon. And happy Mother's Day to you and all the loving mothers out there. Dominicans, so that we have now come to the end of another very interesting conversation. And again, those of you who may have just tuned in and did not get this brother's name properly or did not get the organization that he represented, let me just take a few minutes here just to go over, just to recap. His name is Brother Akash Maharaj. It is spelled A-K-A-A-S-H, that is Akash. Maharaj, M-A-H-A-R-A-G. Okay, lots of A's in this brother name. But I guess he's an A individual, so I guess that speaks for the lots of A's being there. So Akash Maharaj, we spoke to a while ago. He represented here this afternoon. He's an ambassador at large for the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption. All right. So we just had a very interesting conversation, I must say. I tried to the best of my ability to at least get him to understand, get him to kind of sink into his psyche, as it were, what we are going through in Dominica for some time. And so I just want to thank you guys for spending the 2 hours here with us this afternoon. It's always a pleasure. It's always my pleasure, that is. And by extension, the Civic Vibes team. I know some of you have not been seeing the Civic Vibes team in terms of they making themselves known, but it is a team that is in the back, basically ensuring that we have a well put forward program for you guys each and every Sunday once the sun shines. And so on behalf of the team, I want to thank you for being there. And also I want to thank the team as well for doing a very, very good work. So that is it. There are some little pressing matters that, I want to just dive into before I let you guys off to enjoy what is left of your Mother's Day holiday. I think I'll just touch on 2 or 3 of them just as an update, so you can look forward to those discussions, maybe making news or maybe making part of the talk radio in the upcoming week. I'm being told as well that this matter that the police reported on, read that amount of cash that was confiscated by the customs in Dominica, I'm being told that there's something there in terms of the police reporting on that matter that it doesn't add up. Something there, something is amiss. If you take note of the date of reporting on that matter, and what I'm being told that matter, the police had it under wraps for some time. I guess they will say, or they will cover under the aspect of it was under quote unquote investigation, but I'm being told that it is because that they could not hold it any longer that came to the fore, so that you could get a good idea or better idea of what is and was going on there. I'm being told as well that the monies that was reported that should have been, or they put into some kind of account in one of the financial institutions there, we may be hearing some breaking news about that money in the week. So let me leave it there for now. But that is one case that you guys have to keep your eyes and ears on. I'm also being told from the grapevine as well that that case in question, it is not just the gentleman that is involved in that matter, or the court with that huge sum of money. It is not only that gentleman that's involved. There are much bigger fishes in that matter. And so we just wait until the identity or identities of those bigger quote unquote fishes can be identified in that matter. So that is one matter I want to touch on. There's another matter that I would just like to apprise the Dominican people on as well. For those of you who are in Dominica, especially those of you in the Bath Estate area or have the opportunity to pass on that Bath Estate Bridge area, you remember sometimes back, the government of the day gave 59, 50, how many homes or apartments in that area. There's a wall that is now being constructed on the edge of that river, basically trying to protect the apartments from the havoc or the potential havoc of that river. Please, those of you who have the opportunity to pass in that area, please scrutinize the wall, the works that is happening below that bridge, that Bath Estate Bridge. And you can report. You can report. You don't have to be any big rocket contractor to understand that some things that are taking place there is not right. And so I leave it up to you guys to be the judge in that matter. Number one, the foundation of that wall, the footing of that wall, and the connecting of that wall to the main bridge, to what they're trying to do or what they're proposing to do. That I can tell you, folks, there's great difficulty in this situation. So please take it up. Yours truly alone cannot take up Dominica. I always keep my eyes and ears and cameras on, so you two can do your best as well to bring the issues to the fore as well. So we touch on the bridge, we touch on that investigation, quote unquote. There was one other matter that I had to touch on before I leave, but it seems to not be coming to mind now as we speak. So on that note, Dominica, I think I will take it here. Let me just, I see Margot Larrock is here. Margot, good evening to you. Good evening to Afi and the crew, the walkers crew, I call them. And by extension, the people of Dominica who continue to walk each and every Wednesday for their country. All right, so Margot, yes, we are bigging you up, you and Athi and the team. Rosie Nice is there as well. Good evening to you, Rosie. Judith Cochran is always there. John Alfred, you're there. Good evening to you. Davidson Labon, that's my brother from St. Lucia. Good evening to you. Maybe, just maybe, you might see Davidson on sometime with us right here at Civic Vibes. My brother Pat Corbett from Portsmouth, always locked on. Good evening to you, my brother. Dorian Dorival, I call this guy a usual suspect. He's always on. Lucia James, thank you very much as well. Adelaide Joseph, thank you very much. Cecilia Bedminster is saying it never adds up, Lofty. Thank you very much, Cecilia, another usual suspect, always there. Cheryl Bernadette Garraway, thank you very much, Cheryl, for the little discuss we had, I think last week it was. Thank you very much for the motivation and the inspiration that you passed my way. And thank you for being glued to the live as well. Dear Rose, a true Rose indeed. She's always there. I really wonder sometimes where Dr. Matthew gets time, but she's always there. She's on Alex live, she's on Lofty live, she's on her live, she's on everybody's live, she's moderating, she's doing everything good for Dominica. So she's indeed a true Rose of Dominica. So dear Rose, that is Dr. Matthew. Thank you very much for playing your part in terms of nation building. Let me say as well a big thank you to brother Alex Bruno, another warrior in the business. Alex Bruno on short notice. Yesterday it was kind of put the voice to the ad that where we accommodated Mr. Maharaj today. So brother Alex, thank you for your input here as well. We also not want to forget Marilyn Isles. Marilyn Isles is always there. She's also a worker in the vineyard as it were. So thank you very much, Marilyn, for being part and parcel of Civic Vibes as well. Your work is greatly appreciated. I told you Paula Celestine is there. Paula, good evening to you, my friend. Thank you very much for service to country as well. Omar Monel, Marina Charles, Margel Durand. That is my cousin, brother Margel Durand. I have to make contact with you to see if you know when Esther Durand, that is our cousin. She's been laid to rest. I really want to attend that funeral of Esther Durand, a young lady in the prime of her life, basically passed. She has gone to the great beyond. And so we ask that the entire Durand family at this time, especially her mom, her dad, close relatives, you know, be encouraged. At least Esther Durand is not, you know, in pain anymore on this side of life. Be encouraged, be encouraged. All right. Marilyn Pascal is there. Harold Vidal. I'm just going through the names just to big you guys up as being part and parcel of the program, because sometimes the program is so heavy. We don't get time to mention your names and appreciate you for being part and parcel with us every Sunday. And that is very, very critical for the continuation of Civic Vibes program. So we just on Mother's Day saying, paying tribute to you guys out there, especially the mothers and also the fathers who are playing the role of mothers as well. Eliza Lewis, good evening to you, always there as well. I mentioned Pat Corbett before. Marilyn Pascal, Marshall Lawrence, good evening to you. Who else is there with us? Claralyn Warrington, that is another usual suspect. Good evening to you. Anthony Joseph, Chris Bugono. Chris Bugono, good evening to you, my brother. Chris can only be Chris, eh? But Chris, I love you nonetheless, my brother. Thank you very much. Darren Yard, good evening. Ronnie Roy Matthew, my brother from the Marigold area, good evening. Owen Prosper, Elizabeth Douglas, good evening to you. Adelaide Joseph, I mentioned already. Who else is there with us? Dave Bertrand, that brother is always there. A very good evening to you. Earl Bruno, my brother Earl Bruno, I call him the militant brother. Earl Bruno, thank you very much, my brother, for being there as well. I heard you had a ball of a time, Earl, up at Jungle Bay this afternoon. I hope you came back in one piece. But seeing that you're listening to the live, I realize you're in one piece. I hope you didn't drink too much Dunga. Is Dunga you call it, Earl? Earl alone that know what he calls Dunga. Eh? So if you guys want to know what is Dunga, please ask Earl Bruno when next you see him on his live or when you meet him in person, ask Earl Bruno, what is the meaning of Dunga? And he will tell you what is Dunga. I will not sell out the secret between himself and myself for now, okay? Janet Robinson, what is that? Avilo, I hope I pronounced that properly. Avilo, yes, good evening to you. Thank you very much. Harriet James, good evening. Skyly Blanc, you are there as well, good evening. Jennifer Daru. Celia Gordon, good evening to you. Rosie Nice, Everlasting Peter, and the list goes on and on and on. We also have Patricia Zamor is watching. Celia King is watching as well, my friend in the Jimmy area. Good evening to you. Jolie Polidor, you are there as well. Thank you, Julie, for all that you do as well and all that comes our way in terms of compliment. Rudolph Marie, that's my another brother out there somewhere. Good evening to you, Brother Marie. Phoebe Jones, good evening as well. Peter Carbon, we had Peter Carbon sometime back on the program. Ivinia Joseph, good evening. Thelma Sylvester, good evening. Teresa Susanna Roll, I saw this young lady, I must say, outside the court. Susanna is always looking youthful as ever. Good evening to you, Susanna. Norman Shillingford, good evening to you, my brother as well. Jan Joseph, you're always there, good evening to you. Kenda Nicholas, Antoine George, Cassandra Del Sol, good evening to you. And folks, let me tell you something about what's in it. Jan has a lot of latest clothes. So if you need to get your clothes, your fashion clothing, whatever it is, just check Jan Joseph. She's one of us. And we have to learn to support our own. All right, Dominicans? So let us give Jan some support in that department. So if you're thinking of clothes, Mother's Day is here with us, you're thinking of some gift, whatever it is, you can just check Jan Joseph and she will basically try to assist you with some of a specialized business. Bernard Aline, my brother, good evening to you all in the UK. Franklin Timothy, Marvelyn Pascal, Adi John, Ezra Warrington, brother, a very erudite brother as well, out there in the French territory. Good evening to you. Sometime we may speak to Mr. Winston to bring us up to date as to what is happening in our region where the French is concerned. So Brother Winston, look out for a shout out or a call from me in that department. And we have Viva Mamo, a guru as well in the business of social media. This brother is always on, or this lady is always on, whoever Viva Mamo is. Yes, so folks, I think that is it for me. Those of you names I did not call, let me put my disclaimer right up and say that my apology. My apology, all right? If I did not call your name, it's not that I did not want to, but it's just that right about now, either it did not come up on the frame or it maybe just kind of got lost in all the messages here and there. So that's it, folks. I'm gonna take you out, leave you guys with sort of motherly song this afternoon. Let me see if I can pull up one and dedicate it to